where those who perceive truth may strive to make others see.
A big, powerful America, and shoot them for what?
On that continent, we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other.
I want you to imagine a city that has no source of water within like 5 kilometers. And the government proposes making a park that surrounds a lake in the middle of this city. And when a journalist is puzzled and asked where the water will come from, a representative tells them that the lake will be rejuvenated by water from the water treatment facility. Today, we're going to be talking about water systems or water treatment in the Renaissance. And this is interesting in that it's not interesting to the public, right? The idea here is that, there are more quote-unquote sexy things to talk about than water treatment or how we treat water in general, right? But in terms of when you take away the water, there is no life, and that's really very important for us to understand in terms of transitioning into this future here, right? How we treat water, what we do with water, things like that. I personally think Elon's a clown, but the EPA is, I think, the EPA is pretty I wouldn't take them very seriously in terms of a lot of different things, right? But in terms of with this Renaissance going into the future, one thing that I'd really like to see is an actual competition among cities that is really to say water quality that is source or surface water quality, right? That's going to be, I think that would be really nice to see, and I think it's going to require a lot of work in terms of actually getting there, and we really have to, I think we really have to dig in and understand, we can't continue with treating water the way we treat water and then go to stores and get, was it water from the ice, some kind of a fancy water bottle, to essentially, it's a drink, and it's insanity. It's absolute insanity. And I think this is another symptom of really what we're looking at is capitalism unhinged, and I think it's very, very much something that we gotta get on a correct course about, and we gotta be very drastic about this because water is becoming more valuable, and how we treat water itself is also going to be something that's looked at and very much it's in terms of future generations looking at us now in terms of how we treat water in general, it's going to be tremendous, and it will not reflect the current focus that the mainstream news or a lot of news outlets period focus on, right? But it is going to be instrumental in terms of in the future. Now, I think there's a lot I can say about how we treat water, and I think a lot of it's going to be brushed over in this segment. But I really want people to understand that this idea of transforming our relationship with water, it's going to be very much felt by us as a people. It's going to not be something to where we can simply, for instance, give some money to a fund, and that's kind of the way it is. Give some money to a fund, and now those people in those destitute countries are going to have a better quality of life thanks to you. It's not going to be like that, and I think a lot of us really what we don't understand is that by the time you country or your politicians have to tell you that there is in California they do something to where it's like, hey, look, there's kind of a water shortage, and they have to kind of broadcast that message out in different ways. By the time your politician opens their mouth to tell you about the water, about any water situation, it's going to be far too late. It's not going to it's not going to be a situation to where that these politicians are going to come to you and warn you about upcoming what could happen. It's going to be it's going to be very dramatic in terms of the life altering consequences of what we do. And I'm really I don't want to fear monger with people, and I think that that's very important. But we do have to be shaken out of this illusion that we can continue the way we have been continuing, because we can't, and that's very, very much simple. Now, when it comes down to referencing a lot of what's going on in the city, I mean in the world in general, I think one thing that has very much stuck out as stuck out in terms of where we can go or what we can look at in the future, and in terms of moving into the future. In China, they have something called the Sponge City Initiative, and that is that right there. I'm hearing this particular book that we're referencing. I didn't mention the book. We're referencing Water-Wise Cities and Sustainable Water Systems by Xiaochang C. Wang, and Guangtao. So, and I apologize for butchering those names. But when it comes down to this particular book, I want to preface, I don't know how much. I haven't personally been to China. I don't know about China, but I do know about I do know that these initiatives would be very much tremendous investments into the future. And speaking of investments, you have people on Wall Street now, trying to buy up water. I want to say in Colorado, they were trying to buy up water streams and things of that nature. I don't know what I don't know how insane. I don't know how insane these people are. I really don't. But these guys are the thought of oh, you know what? This is going to be a problem. Let's buy water. What? This is. It's dark, but it is kind of it's clownish. It is honestly to think you're going to be able to buy this water and somehow legally be able to keep this water away from people in that area or something it's absolutely insane. But I do I think that these guys are going in a lot of these different they're not seeing logically. They're seeing, oh, this is the world that we live in. Let's keep going. And it's kind of it's sad. It's sad, but it's also very telling in terms of where we're going now, to know that people, like, there are companies on Wall Street who are investing, like, who are trying to purchase bodies of water. You know, that's pretty dark. But I mean, in terms of going back to this particular case, like, I think it is a good investment in terms of these initiatives, right? Like, turning these initiatives, turning the idea of cleaning water into, actionable items. And this is very much something that it's very, very important for us to do that. And I mean, even directly competing with, kind of even broadcasting, even if China's even if there's a propaganda component to this, really, just competing with China, I think, would be really nice to see with a lot of these areas and locations. With China, they noticed they had, they came to the conclusion. This is all through the book. Now we're gonna assume that this is not propaganda and through the book, right? So, but they came, and I've heard this from a few different sources. I haven't dug deep into it, but I will say that this idea of, it looks like this may be very much real in terms of this particular initiative and what they're doing now. And the idea is that there's like, they noticed pollution. They noticed, like, bodies of, surface water being just completely polluted, dirty, smelly water, right? And they wanted to fix that, and that became an initiative for a lot of different cities, and in a lot of different ways. This particular, China's a very, it's a diverse landscape, and cities and where they go and how they're placed, and their access to water, it gave a pretty solid perspective on that, right? So, and this is kind of this is more of like a book that you have, like, case studies to where, like, looks like some form of I want to say, like, some educational institution, or some kind of scholar of some sort actually went in and delineated what was going on, in terms of what that particular case, right? And when it comes down to this idea, we should really understand something, because, and there's a lot in this particular piece, and there's a lot about that I myself would have to say about the water situation, in terms of just the kind of situation that I've been hearing about, rather, kind of the water shortage in California, and also, how water's being treated in general. I think we really need that particular idea of, what to do now, and how to go about this idea of a societal-wide renovation, right? And this is, I think this particular book, I think it's very important, because the recurring themes in this book, like, as diverse as these themes may be in a lot of situations, it always comes down to data being essential to whatever response that we take, and that's very, very much important, because we can't just we can do a lot. We can, I think it's important for us to simply just do. But that data, that initial investigation into things, or the, in terms of the data that has accumulated, the data that we want to continue to accumulate, and really getting down to, what's going on, I think is going to help us really highlight and pinpoint sources of pollution, and how to highlight sources of pollution, but also highlight how we deal specifically with sources of pollution. Now, this is and how we can deal with it in the future. So, say, for instance, based on this particular data set, we know that this particular factory, up the street is going to lead to this amount of, well, there's a lot of different pollutants in water, but let's say that we'll say lead, right? We'll say lead. This amount of lead in the water. If we know how the water sheds into the surface level water, we can design the landscape in between to specifically take out lead from water, right? So this is very important, right? So this idea of data, and especially historical data, and how we really look at and treat that, and because this is, really evaluating a situation is going to be key and instrumental, because we need to develop plans. We need to, in terms of the idea now, it's developing different plans and different options for different plans based on the idea of available funding for different plans, right? Because we still live in this world, right? That's very important for us. We need to understand that this idea of whatever plan that we come up with, in terms of the plan itself and having a projected outcome for that plan according to, whatever amount of data or research, right? That's key, right? So I'm really picturing a group of people looking over a city and saying and really thinking about, okay, how do we treat this particular situation? And I think this is going to, of course, be something that needs to stretch across, water bodies really don't follow our lines that we put on a map, right? They're going to follow their own lines in a lot of cases. So we need to, of course, collaborate and see what we can do, and, have ideas about what's coming into the city, the water quality coming into the city, or, and the water quality going out. We flushed this toilet, and, going back to this lifestyle change, and we kind of, it's gone. Our problems are gone. And that's the mindset shift, right? Because that idea of water just being able to flush water and it being gone, that water ends up somewhere. And in a lot of cases, it will be I'll say, this idea of water treatment and how we treat water, I want to say we put a lot of chlorine, or there's a lot of chlorine in terms of with water treatment in general, but but we really don't have I would venture to guess that there hasn't been a lot of test in terms of what chlorine does to the wildlife down the stream from where our water is now cleansed of a lot of maybe bacterial products and things like that. But this water going down the stream now, there probably hasn't been a lot of significant, like, you know, data done about what this does to wildlife down the stream. And this idea of water treated is, it's not ubiquitous. Like, you know, like, all of your water isn't treated, right? So this is, if we're lucky in a lot of situations, if there's like a significant rainfalls, a lot of times the idea is that, oh, this rain is like there is crossover between the sewer and the actual, or the sewers treatment, or the drainage from the street and the actual sewer itself, right? And those things will mix up, and essentially that overflow, that will just go into the river, right? The idea is that, hey, this idea of the rain being such a problem right now, being able to dilute the water, it'll be whatever it is at this point. We kind of just throw our hands up in the air, and it's just, you know, at that point. And I mean, to be honest with you, we think about, you know, this idea of water being water quality. It is, I mean, it's very much important. It's very much it's very much dependent on the idea of concentrations in the water of different, you know, of different quote unquote pollutants, right? Or, you know, whatever. That idea of water being in a system, and, you know, being exposed to rain, it does dilute the water, and it does create, you know, those situations to where it's just like, hey, I think the rain's going to help us out now, and I think there's a reasonable component to believing that that's something that we can depend on. But in terms of how our pollutants are treated throughout, how that water flows away, what happens to that water then, we do not like, that's so far and above what we do now that it is that's not, we're not even close to that. But it could literally be a problem upstream for different species, different different water bodies, depending on what kind of waste we have in the water, how much waste we have in the water, where that waste is deposited, how that, if that waste, is normally something that floats, to the top, or, drops to the bottom. It could be concentrated somewhere down the road. But we are so, we are so far away from even evaluating those situations. It is insane, right? So we have, for those that don't know, we have our particular water treatment, our water treatment in itself. All right, so we came from small villages that essentially just got rid of sewage by dumping it in the river, right, or dumping it in whatever body of water, and that was kind of the way things were. And the idea, going back to that concentration, cities and villages were so small then that it didn't affect the constant. It didn't, they didn't see that down the line, right? But as we kind of evolved, or, whatever you want to call it, we started to concentrate into areas. And those areas became, we had to realize that we couldn't do what we continued doing with smaller villages, right? So we can't just dump water. And, and we had to do a lot of different things in terms of even getting the water, or even getting the sewage, or even getting the waste to any type of water body, period, right? So the Romans are famous for a lot of the sewer system, or the sewage system, and the how they dealt with sewage, in terms of how they actually put across, how they actually like moved into like how they actually moved into bodies, right? So they have like a literal system designed for moving waste away from the city. And that idea of moving waste, and that's also something that we see in terms of in times of in China. They had something similar to that, to where like they had to do something. They had to become more aware of what they were doing with the idea of sewage and moving sewage, and they had there was some kind of initiative, and that was I can't exactly explain how they did it, but it was an initiative of essentially getting waste away from the actual city itself. Now, this idea of separating sewage from the actual drains and storm drains that we kind of have today, right? That is relatively new, right? So this is something that is really not like I said. A lot of cities, when it rains, they kind of throw their hands up a lot. They kind of not really a lot, but they'll throw their hands up essentially and say, "Hey, look, man, it's a rain event, and we're kind of helpless at this particular point." But there are situations to where there's a kind of a more solidly defined, like, "Hey, look, this is the sewage, and we don't want that overflow and that and that mixing of the storm drain water and the sewage water," and they've been able to essentially separate the two to where that's no longer a problem. And but I mean, like I said, with this thought process, they have to weigh a lot, right? So I mean, the fact that a lot of us aren't paying attention to this is tremendous, right? Because politicians, they just want to talk about they want to talk and make you feel like they're special, and that's what's so crazy, because they don't money and resources is a huge factor for this, right? So but in terms of treating water, the way they treat water, a lot of times they're not going to be motivated. They're not going to be motivated by things like, we're causing the wildlife a problem, or hey, we can't really drink from our streams or fish or anything like that. Those people aren't, the wildlife people and the fishermen. They don't have huge lobbies like the people who want to sell us, like the people who want to bottle and sell us water because they bought some stream somewhere. They don't have that. These guys are quite literal. Like, by the time you hear it, unfortunately, I mean, it seems like we'll be looking at a situation like Flint, like to where like we're looking at, something at the actual, and God, I hope this wouldn't be the case, but I mean, just seeing like just what happens at the, at the actual hospital being that alarming factor for them, and because they're ignoring like our operational, despite this whole, we're kind of a society built on science and things like that. Our operational intelligence is not built. we do not operate according to anything scientific. Like a lot of us, we operate based on emotions, how we feel about a lot of things, and the truth is that, I mean, all the factors could tell us, like, hey, look, we're going to see some problems down the line, but they won't act until emotions of the people are being affected by whatever case or scenario. And it's really hard, and it's really, to be frank, it's just disgusting the way the way this isn't talked about and avoided because because of the trend that a lot of our politicians have now. Now, this idea is, or this book, it's really, there's a point to where they talk about really how we treat water, which is kind of where this whole idea of, where I learned a lot of this stuff in terms of with the storm drain and the actual wastewater and the separation of the two, and that being kind of a new concept. But and what happens and what's been taking place, and those things are huge. But it also talks about and it focuses on the cases that deviate from the norm, right? And that's interesting, right? Because a lot of what happens is when you deviate from the norm is you're talking about decentralization. A lot of different circumstances. And when it comes down to decentralization, we're talking about having water treated more locally than kind of centrally, and that is it's an interesting concept because what it brings about in terms of what I think about is this idea of political infrastructure, basically, right? So that idea of that centralized control, it gives a certain amount of power to have those localities that are dependent on the central control. It pays to have them disconnected from how this is taken care of in a central location, and what happens at the central location in general, and that is huge, right? That's going to be very huge, and it's in terms of this idea of decentralization being really key. I think it makes me think of a few things. One, this is where you deviate from the norm, of course, right? So that where we deviate, how we deviate, what happens, this is going to really, really impact, impact the way people understand water. And I think what I really would like to see is, say, for instance, initiatives to where we have very real eyes on our water quality. Say, for instance, where there's you're able to, your roads or your particular parks, or they're coming into contact with the idea of water quality in a very real way. So, like the idea of fish being in a stream. A lot of our fish aren't in stream. Like they're not able to inhabit our streams for a lot of cases, and that's a very huge thing that is, just not getting nearly enough attention. But the idea is that idea of changing that relationship and what we do. Say, for instance, you now have to. There's a new plumbing system in place that you kind of feel is a bit of a headache sometimes. But you go to this, particular park, or you go to this area, and they can show you the difference in terms of these fish are now able to live in this stream. These fish are now able to exist here. And that's or literally like having, literal like initiatives that where the like initiatives that maybe or maybe not attached to the actual like governmental institutions or anything, to where they cook up only local fish or only local things. And it's linked to this element of water quality, of course, right? Those things I think would be very impactful, and just I'd really like to see that in a city in itself. Now, this idea of decentralization, there's a case being made against centralization to where like, oh, it's actually more efficient, and I'm picturing some pencil neck on Reddit saying this and just like me wringing his neck out. I'm just like shut up. Like, but it's more efficient, and this is like, that's. I think that behavior might be a bit toxic, but I mean, I think it's really it's a in terms toxic on my part is in terms of the idea of that person trying to impose some kind of, I don't know, knowledge, but look, the idea of that particular situation where you got this this person, or according to the system now, this may be of value monetarily to have this system in place right now, but when you change the relationship that people have with their water, that value, it may not be something that you can see in terms of in terms of, I won't even say economically, I'll say it may not be something that you see financially right then and there, but the overall human understanding, right? That transformation from where we are at now as humans, as parasites to the world, to humans as symbiotes to the world, that is something that you don't quite see on a financial budget sheet right now, right? And I say right now because that's something that could very well lead to lead to something in the future in terms of that future investment. Just because you can do something, and it benefits you financially right now, doesn't mean you should do it. And that's such a strong instrumental point. Right now we really need to get that into a lot of people's heads. Now, this idea of reusing storm, or just water treatment in general, a tremendous part of this is reusing water and how we use water, how we reuse water, and why we reuse water, and things of that nature, right? And this idea of, there's a case where, first off, this is instrumental, right? How many times you use water, how you use water, it is very important in terms of how we can basically make the most out of every gallon that we have now, and that being probably the most bang for buck, right? Reuse is where you get the most bang for buck. Now, this idea of the case that they mentioned is where they reuse stormwater in a city for things like car washing and watering plants, right? And that's very, very, it's powerful because, how that goes about and what they do and how what happens there, I think is so, it is so transformative in terms of using that stormwater in that way rather than just simply dumping it into the regular system that we have. It can also be, this can also be mixed in terms of actual water treatment, right? So how you treat water and what you do with the water, there's infinite possibilities there when you think about reuse, in terms of how to reuse it, what opportunities come about because you're reusing it, and how you're reusing it. Now, this idea of pollution and how water is polluted, right? So wastewater is simple. You put things in the water, but you put things in the water directly, right? So whether that be, you know, just normal human sewage, or, you know, like just tissue paper. Jeez, I like that right there. It got under my skin a lot because I recently found out that a lot of the tissue that we use now is simply not. We're flushing this stuff down the toilet, and like I say, the problem's gone. But somewhere down the line, that problem builds up, and tissue paper is apparently one of the big things that builds up because it's just like it does not dissolve in water. It doesn't normally dissolve. It just piles up, and a lot of times it clogs up systems in a lot of different ways. And that right there was something that got on my nerves. Like, it got under my skin because it's just like, man, this is like, it just became too much at that point. And this wasn't through the WaterWise book, but it was through like a book on recycling that I'm not going to particularly. It's definitely going to be incorporated into the Foundry design in terms of how things go in the future and what happens in the future. But in terms of the actual report on that, we may do something on recycling and the Renaissance in the future. Now, when it comes down to this idea of water, like water treatment, right? So and how water is polluted, right? Particularly is, right? So we weren't even talking about wastewater. We were talking about stormwater, right? Stormwater and how stormwater is like polluted. What was very, very, it was so I don't even know the words to say it exactly, but but apparently there's runoff from roads and buildings. Those things have very real impacts on the environment, right? So it made me think about a few things, right? What is our road made out of? One, right? Because when it rains, those things shed. What effect do different cars or different exhaust systems, or even where we're like the placement of the exhaust system on a car, how does that impact what's left on the road? Very, very important. But also houses, in terms of how we build houses and how we paint houses, right? Those things are very much big, right? Those are very much big things, right? Especially in the city where you have like this huge building that these huge buildings in a particular location where runoff becomes more important because of how much surface area that water is going to come in contact with from your building. And those things and how they pollute and what they do, that's very much something that's of interest, right? And because the way we handle these situations, right? Say, for instance, we know that this particular water from this particular segment of road is usually this particular makeup. Now we have something to go off of in terms of designing the actual literal landscape or the plant life that exists in between that road and whatever, like I believe they call it a swallow or a ditch that's next to the road, right? We have an understanding now to where how do these things come into, what do we do here? And that's, very, very much in terms of this design, it's very instrumental, right? Maintenance is a completely different issue, and that needs to definitely be thought of as well, and be something that is something that we go into and we take care of in terms of even how we design the system in general. But having that system is so important. It's so important in terms of having that system designed to take away whatever pollutants that do exist now, and constantly watch it and constantly monitor it. And that's kind of the idea of the competition being in place in terms of competitions for water quality that I mentioned earlier in the episode. I think that's one that's huge. It's going to be huge. And the actual, when you're building a house and what that house does and how that house operates, or how that house sheds water, not really operates, right? So the idea of shedding water, how it sheds water, I think is gonna impact things like building supply and the paints that are available, why they're available. Like I said, just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do something. Houses may be X amount cheaper if you use this particular paint that's literally toxic, right? So using this particular paint, and then down the line your kid plays in a puddle and gets sick because they drunk something out of the puddle that came off of your house. It's we can't live in kind of this delusional state of delusional state that is unhinged capitalism. We can't live there. We can't have every system reliant on this. It's not going to work, and it doesn't work in a lot of different situations. Now, when it comes down to this runoff and how we treat runoff and what we do with runoff, it's very important. But also fertilizer is in terms of farmland and fertilizer. I am for those that don't know, check out WikiLeaks. This is such a sidebar, but check out WikiLeaks and the Renaissance if you're more interested. But our politicians are just salesmen abroad. They're basically just salesmen abroad, and it is so ridiculous. But this idea of, for instance, Monsanto wanted to they wanted to sell this to all types of countries, and they got hardline no, and we just were gung ho about getting these guys to accept Monsanto, and even painted them as more more scientifically advanced if they accepted Monsanto fertilizer or something. I'm just are you serious? Is that really something that we said? It was, but we did that, and it's so ridiculous. But the runoff, in terms of farmland, and the fertilizer is, I imagine if you drink a cup of water from a stream that is running off, or that has recently run off from a farm, you probably, or a farm in America, because Monsanto they are gung-ho about getting this poison into our crops. And it is so insane that they are able to do this. But in terms of that idea of, farmland and how things are done, if this is the insanity that we kind of have to operate in, maybe designing landscapes to trap that fertilizer runoff, and how that stuff runs off, and when those things may become something that's more important in terms of while we accumulate the resources to deal with this insanity that we're living in now. Now, this idea of holding water and how much water we hold. We talked about China and the Sponge City Initiative, right? And the Sponge City Initiative, I venture to guess, is essentially them being more capable of holding water, right? And I think, and it's been proven that how cities that are able to hold water better have better water quality in general, right? Because you're usually, when you have to hold water, you become more responsible with what you're holding rather than just shedding water in general. And this is speculation on my part. And but when it comes down to the actual holding of water and what we do, a lot of us are probably coming in contact with the rain garden in one instance or another, and that is pretty. Those things that those plant life and everything, those are designed to a lot of times to essentially to make to improve water quality in a lot of ways. And those things are, they're a real gift. I really do appreciate the idea of, the intellect behind that, I'll say, right? And what that does. And in terms of how much water they hold and how they hold water, those are things that, when it comes down to maintenance, those things are something that apparently we need to think about more and more. And another thing is, I got a lot of ideas around this idea of water treatment and how we treat water and water in the Renaissance. But this idea of, for instance, we got this idea of landscape work, who's landscaping and how landscape work works in general, right? Making let's say a particular certification path or some kind of path to where it's not all about the money that these people have and extracting that money. It's more so about educating the landscape professionals to essentially do more or to do more in terms of the actual water quality and turn these guys, baby step them into being legitimate scientists. I think is going to be tremendous in terms of what we do in the future and how we continue doing that. And that whatever we do now, I'm envisioning the money that we save, it should essentially, this is something that could very well, I think very well should translate to helping these landscapers baby step into being more scientific, or literally and helping them economically for in terms of the initiative of what we do in terms of water quality in general. And I know it's thinking about, for instance, I do have particular ideas about what we're doing now in terms of how to better get rid of, better design our plumbing system in general. And I think this idea of, all my ideas are wrapped around, essentially, it's going to, essentially, it would be less convenient. It would be much less convenient for a lot of situations in a lot of cases. But that money that we save now and that heartache that future generations no longer have, or that we don't have to go to, because I do think this is something that we'll see in our generation. I'm 33, but I think we'll see these impacts. I think it's coming to a crescendo. And I think I was talking to somebody particularly at the, what is it called? The Grand Canyon. And there's a river, a lake that's drying up. And they, the person was telling me, no, when I started working there was, that lake and that river was, it was full up, or it was constantly flowing, for this to be dry now is very worrisome. And I think I think we like I said, that idea of a politician having to get up on stage with hat in hand, like, oh, we're actually having some water issues. I mean, like that. You think that's gonna happen? You think that's gonna happen when you have time to fix your behavior with a lot of this stuff? It's gonna happen. It's like, hey, look, you don't have time. It's now. It's tomorrow. It's gonna be next week. We don't have the, we don't have the resources. And I mean, it's it's past time that there is not, it's past time in terms of the idea of thinking that, your elected officials are anything less than salesmen. And that's unfortunate with a lot of these guys, because they I think some of them may be good, but or may be good in terms of what they want and what they're going for with their initiatives. But the things that they have to, the system that they have to adhere to, how they do things, I don't think we have much hope in that realm of politics in general. And now, this idea of the idea of reclaimed water, right? We have or reusing water, right? So we're that beginning story that we talked about with that park that was going to be built based on wastewater. A tremendous thing. That's actually, believe it or not, a project was a project was completed with that, with that in mind, and by all means, it looks successful to what's going, to the actual initiative or the completion goals, I'll say, right? And a lot of this is on the idea of flowing water and keeping water flowing. Of course, they had to be very much, they had to treat the water and the water treat, and what happens in the water treatment facility, but sometimes that water wouldn't necessarily be of high quality when it left the water treatment facility. And they were able to increase water quality by, in more than just this situation where you have kind of the park in the middle of nowhere, or the park, that doesn't really have access to water, but it has a lake because there's a wastewater treatment facility. But they had, elements to where once you realize, or once you were able to put initiatives in place to essentially just keep water flowing, it became like the water and quality increased, right? And that's very huge, right? Because stagnant water and what that, and of course, if we think about, if we even just imagine the idea of stagnant water, usually it's going to be something that has accumulated some kind of odor or something like that, right? But this particular idea, in terms of what's happened at this particular park, they were able to keep water flowing in various different water bodies and able to clean water, and it's able to improve water quality that way. That's something that's something that's very, very much useful. There's even a contraption that was diagrammed in the particular book where they were basically using solar-powered fans to move, lily pads or some kind of floating island of plants through the water. And they were, the plants themselves were designed to clean the water, but that flowing aspect of keeping things flowing and how things were flowing, I think, was also another factor as well. That I feel like I'm indebted to this I'm indebted to this book in more ways than I realized when I picked it up, in terms of how it transformed my ideas around, particularly how cities work, or how a city can work in general, and what it takes to maybe, design a city in general, right? Because more than simply an engineer, an engineer of physical spaces. I really view myself as more of an energetic engineer of sorts, right? So like that is more so kind of like the idea of that water. What we do with that water is definitely is going to be instrumental, but also in terms of controlling and the politics behind what cars are on the road, how often or not how often, but what cars are allowed in this particular space, and and controlling things to that idea, it becomes more important, because it's not, it becomes not really about overreaching, as trying to promote government overreach, but trying to promote certain initiatives through governmental powers and restrictions. Because, like I said, everything that you can do, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something, right? So I keep thinking about like that boxing. I keep thinking about like the boxing match. There's a boxing match recently with like Mike Tyson, who's like 50-something years old, and Jake Paul, who's like 20-something. It's just because it made money, that idea of making money, it's not appealing, in terms of getting something, extracting something very real out of these situations, these circumstances. Particularly, in that particular case, I think Jake Paul should have been more worried about his legacy at that point, right? Because I think Jake Paul is somebody who wants to be taken seriously in the boxing world, more than just a stunt man. But I think he's seen that money, and that overwrit his legacy in a lot of situations. And this idea of, these cities and how we design these cities and what we do, I think it won't necessarily be a case of government overreach, but more so, hey, we want to make sure that future generations, they don't look at us like we were just or crazy, we'll say, right? We want to make sure that these guys look at us with some kind of admiration in what we did and what we continue to do. Now, this idea of river flow, of course, is important, but also that whole sponge city thing, right, or that whole like holding water, the initiatives for holding water for longer periods of times is also something, because that it instills a sense of drought resiliency. And those particular initiatives that increase drought resiliency, reuse being one of the things that you get most bang for buck, but also how we design systems to where we hold water in place, what we do with water, how we, keep water on a particular site, and what, those things are going to be more and more important when you get less and less, where, in areas where it becomes, where you don't get rain as often, or you don't have as many rivers and lakes. Those things are going to be very, very much things to continue to think about and look at. In South Africa, it's a very, very ridiculous situation to where the locals in South Africa, they only use 5% of the water, and there's there's a very look at infrastructures in the Renaissance if you want to know more about this or a little bit more about this exactly the situation. But there's a situation to where these guys will literally drill wells to extract more water from this particular area, or from when their water allowance is low. And I'm like, insanity, absolute insanity in South Africa. Side note, these guys are like, you got white people in South Africa like holding up signs that we're in the middle of a genocide, and like the government is like, is it a genocide, or are you just being told that white supremacy is at its in South Africa? Like, is that kind of a thing? I'm just, I don't know. Like, after seeing Palestine and what they've gone through, and seeing like, it just thinking that these people actually have the gall to hold up the word genocide as if they're being like persecuted in any way. It's crazy, but I think, when you live that long, when you live that long on top of the world, with apartheid, you kind of get under the illusion that this is how things are supposed to work. The side note, but when it comes down to like this idea of resiliency, very much, I think we a very powerful definition or a very powerful understanding of the terminology resiliency is response to the failure of established systems, right? So that was very much, I think, ingrained in terms of the idea, for instance, when we think about the mayor, or when we throw our hands up when it rains because of the water flow. And in terms of the resiliency there, I think that it makes me think about that in terms of what we do and how we make sure that we're okay in those situations. Because, you do have situations to where a lot of there are places that get extreme amount of rainfall in short segments of time, and that's like half their year's rainfall for, and they'll get that within like a week or 2 days or something like that. And those places should be designed to be more resilient about what they do with water, because the idea of an established system failing is much more likely. There's a situation to where these ideas of designing, particularly, I think it's levees, right? So they can be designed to help flooding, but also create, when they're not flooded, and those situations to where you're not in an event where there's a high level of water in the city. Those places can be, it can be something to where they can double up as kind of more nature-centric spot, So like basically, in this particular situation, it was just they designed the levee to be a beautiful meetup spot when there was no particular problem with that area, or not problem, but there was no overflow happening. Now, this idea of water quality and how we treat water, and it kind of, I think it's centered around, in terms of the way I'm thinking about designing a new a new system of how we treat water and changing our relationship. It really does seem designed around changing our lifestyles And apparently we consume about 20 liters of water a day. And that's important because maybe that's that's one of the most important things that we should remember in terms of as we transition into a better suited lifestyle in terms of future generations. Having 20 liters a day, what we do, how we can do, or what we can do, how we do live, very much centered around the idea of how many liters of water do we need, should we have access to, and let's go from there in terms of this new system. Now, this idea of we talked a little bit about the overreach, or the possible interpretation is overreach, and it does appear that water-wise cities, they won't be able, or they won't be effective at they won't really lead to effective changes in a body of water without different elements of I hate this word, regulations. Right? I'm growing to love this word after what Elon's doing, but I feel like that's definitely something that is we need to kind of work on, in terms of the idea of creating a water-wise city being linked to the idea of regulations now, right? And how we regulate things. Very much something, right? And we talked about the idea of paint, the building materials, and also the idea of what's really, I think we'll see probably more of in the future, is the idea of rooftop gardens, right? Or was it called rooftop gardens? Where essentially you just have you just have green roofs. That's what I'm talking about. Green roofs. They have there's I want to say there's some kind of factory or some kind of huge building that I believe might sell cars. I want to say they have some kind of rain garden on the roof, or a rooftop garden of some kind, which seems to be, and it's apparently it's showing some pretty cool results. But I think green roofs are going to be something that become much more apparent in the future. And it definitely does help with the idea of, for those that don't know, I think I kind of just been picturing this in my head, but when things do go, let's say when you do have like major rain events, that flow, that when you can hold water, that's what I mentioned. I mentioned holding water, but that flow from those rain events is slowed dramatically, right? So how much rain sheds, how fast rain sheds, those are important factors in terms of how the surrounding landscape is affected, and how we're affected as humans in a lot of situations. And when you have concentrated systems where that water flows, it can easily lead to more destruction in a lot of situations. And but the idea of green roofs is when we kind of make that more common in a society, those things become, that idea of slowing water down, it has a tremendous impact on that. Especially in places where there's a lot of homes or houses, but also where there's like, there's different ways to talk about to talk about incorporating that in terms of with things like cities and how buildings are designed and stuff like that. Now, the idea here is that individuals can work with governments to make a tremendous difference, right? And this is good. This is good because I think, particularly right now, I keep getting on the sidetracks. Particularly right now, I think we have this idea that, we want our government to run like a business, and that is not the case. That is, you do not want your government to run like a business, right? Because a business will not consider quality of life. That will not be a primary motivator for a business. A business will be, financially it's doing well, and that quality, that idea of having a solid quality of life is going to be a tremendous factor for people who want to run, or for governments, right? Because we can't scale up capitalism to a governmental level. We can't scale that. We can't scale it up to where it takes complete root at a government level. I do think that there is an element of shared, there may be shared systems involved, but overall it can't dominate at a governmental level, that mindset of capitalism, because it will poison itself, right? So we were talking about things like, we got things like lobbying going on. We got all types of insanity going on, and it's just like, now we're just like, hey, dilute the poison in the food and the water to where maybe later down the line these guys get in the hospitals and then we can get more money from them there. It's like, it is absolutely insane, and I am so, this is the life that we're living now. This is kind of how things are. And now the idea of what we do now, how we can move now, I think is going to be is going to depend upon the analysis, right? So we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? We need that. We need those different projected outcomes, right? Because we want to make we got to approach this from an element of, this is what we're at now. We got to meet people where they're at now in a lot of situations, especially when we're talking about like frontliners, right? People who are on the front lines of the Blackbird Renaissance in general. We have to meet people now. That's the difference between, I think, the Blackbird Renaissance and a lot of more idealistic movements, I would say, right? Because we want to meet people where they're at now. And that's going to be important for us, because as we design, or as we go through, and evaluate a city and do an investigation about particularly water quality, I'm thinking about the Guild Earth Nation. You guys can look at that particular, there's a video or a Earth Nation segment that you guys can look up. What we do now, how we move things now, I think is going to be very important, because a lot of people, of course, there's going to be a government component. There's going to be an element to where we need to have government on our side, but we need to be very much prepared to move and start moving first, and not really depend on what happens. And wait for the world to play catch up. And that's going to be a lot of what this movement is really built out of. Because maybe things aren't going to look, and be exactly the way we want them to be on a society level. But if we can create those pockets and then design a way to really expand those pockets more and more and more, and show people that, there's another way. Show people that alternate way that that they can transition into. I think that's going to be very important. And the idea of this investigation, how we do it, what funds are available, what grants are available, it's going to be very huge in terms of, evaluating, because we wanted to get, we want to design a few different options based on what's available, based on what we want to see, period, and how we can kind of get there in terms of the effect that it's going to have. Those are going to be extremely time-heavy procedures, right? That upfront work is more time-heavy, because that planning stage is going to save us a tremendous amount of bumps in the road later. And future generations, they could look at our plans in the future, right, when we have those plans laid out. So it's very important to set up and establish a very solid plan for how to carry out things now and how we want things to carry out, because like I said, we got a government administration that's like talking about, that's trying to like deregulate and essentially just puff their chest out like they're saving fraud, waste and abuse, like it's and there's a meme coin like what? Are you serious? I'm gonna try to hold myself in on this one, but I feel like we gotta really understand that there's an element of societal failure that we have to kind of be okay with, right, and adapt with and adapt for, and I think this is it. I think this is that up front, that investigation is going to be very, very important. Now, they also talk about, in terms of this idea of, for instance, data and models and everything, they talk about how there's actual life-size models and life-size replications according to, in different areas. Somewhere in Europe, I think they have like some kind of like large-scale model for basically runoff, basically trying to calculate the effect of runoff in different areas. It's definitely something to look at, and they got some pretty big tests. I'm not going to go over all of them right now, but those places could be very important in terms of actually trying to figure out and convince people that, to buy into whatever system that we sell. I think is going to be important, or whatever system that we offer. These, in terms of how people and what we need to do with water, this. I don't think I'm able to go over a lot of what's going, these different case studies in this particular book, and I do recommend please pick this up if you ever get the chance. But there are various cases, and I feel like I'd just be kind of overloading you at this point to really keep talking about or to really, cite every single type of case. But there are cases to where, there's too much water as opposed to those, more drought-prone places, and what we do then and how we handle things and how things are handled in cases of, we mentioned a little bit about, those extreme waterfall events to where you get like half the year's water in like 2 days or something like that. There's also like campuses. There's a campus in China that was like, they use that as a case study, and how like when we design places, we can or when we design the, in terms of like data and how we, accumulate data, places and how we renovate places and spaces. That may be something that comes into play in terms of turning that into a test case study for different, water event or different events. Also, they mentioned different, strategies like sand filters as well, and how they may be effective with a lot of different situations, and this idea of also like when we construct things. One thing that I think was very powerful that I want to mention, when we construct, for instance, wetlands, those can promote more diversity than what is naturally occurring, right? And that's the, I think that's the element of where I divide from where a lot of people say, hey man, we just need to go back. There is tremendous potential in turning this society, I say a symbiote, right? So rather than being a parasite to what we are now, going to a symbiote, because we can improve things. We don't necessarily, and that is, I think, is very important for us to have that outlook in mind and not really be so, be completely pessimistic to the idea of human potential and the human existence in terms of the health of the other animals on this planet. I do think there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and I would like people to see that. Now, this idea of water in the Renaissance, or water treatment in the Renaissance, it's going to depend upon maintenance. It's going to depend upon education as well, education, and that education is going to lead to, a societal maintenance that kind of takes place too in terms of with a lot of this stuff. And we have to be more responsible. Like I said, nope. If you are expecting some politician to say and make that his campaign promise that he's going to improve the infrastructure of X, Y, like that's never going to happen, right? That's never going to happen. It's just like, and this is my viewpoint. I will say that's never going to happen, okay? I don't think that that's ever going to be a campaign promise, right? And this is, but I do think that speculation is based on what we've been seeing so far, right? And the truth is, a lot of lobbying, they'd simply put a stop. They'd simply try to put a stop to that idea of you wanting to improve the infrastructure and improve a lot of things. Look at dark money in the Renaissance, and you'll see the Koch brothers. They came together and they came together to get intellectuals or people who would claim to be intellectuals on their side in terms of with a lot of the ignorance that they really promote with a lot of their systems. And it is ignorance because, you're essentially poisoning and killing your own population. But there's a lot, we have to fix this, and we have to be intelligent about how we fix this, because there's tremendous incentive to be extremely intelligent about how you break it. And this right here is water treatment in the Renaissance. Sorry for taking so long. If anything, please let me know how you feel about water treatment, what you've seen, kind of cool projects you know about, and if anything, I'll hope to see you soon. Do all the podcast stuff, do all the YouTube stuff, comment, share. If anything, this is in terms of documentation, how we move forward. I think we need to start moving moving toward this lifestyle, and a lot quicker than what we may originally believe. And in any case, I hope to see you soon. Thank you.